Ben and what the bad thing that Ben did. Ben, is your plane still at annual?
Yeah. I mean, we just dropped it off last week. So, yeah. It
Last
is.
week?
I think it was last week.
How long does it take him to do it? Come on.
I mean, hell, he probably haven't even gotten to it yet. It's probably 2 weeks usually.
Yeah. We're doing ours.
Listen, we live in Atlanta. Everybody's got plane in annual. Every mechanic has 7 planes in queue waiting for an annual to get done.
There's like people that aren't even pilots that have planes in annuals.
It seems that way. That's why I'm trying to get my son to hurry up and get through his maintenance course so he can do my annual when I tell him to do it.
Isn't our guest today a surprise? Well, it's there now. So
yeah.
Still trying to wonder why we're trying to promote his work, why we're trying to keep it a surprise.
Yeah.
Trying to understand that one.
Well, I told you that one of my latest obsessions is watching depositions on YouTube.
Yeah.
This is kind of now I just want this podcast to slowly turn into boy, there's some really good stuff on there. It's interesting.
I'm looking for a new rabbit hole to go down. So maybe you'll share a couple of links with me.
It's I don't know, the psychology of it is fascinating to me.
Yeah.
But
hey, Seth,
look at that. Boom.
Hey, Grizzly. Hey, Cheryl, checking in from Texas.
Nice.
Oh yeah,
it's Ugly Cub, which is a reference to what Paul at AV, is a news guy. Anyway, what he calls the NX Cub. He's like, there's lots of Cubs, but this is the ugly one. So
got it.
He's got an ugly Cub. It's just up the road from me. So
very nice. We got some down under viewers. How about that?
Yeah.
What time is it there?
Rolling in. Yeah.
It's probably 8 a.m. would be my guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, it's 8 o'clock. Should we?
AV Web, thank you.
Light the fires.
Paul Dye is the name I was turning to look for. Sorry.
Let's hit it.
Let's do it.
Welcome to the Midlife Pilot Podcast. What is it like to become a pilot in midlife? The challenges are unique, but so are the rewards. Hosts Ben, Brian, and Ted talk learning to fly, growing as pilots, and the joy of flying to destinations. The purpose of the podcast is not to teach, but to share knowledge and experiences. You definitely should not take any advice too seriously from an aviation podcast that uses terms like icing on the vegetables. Okay, checklists are complete. Let's get the show started.
Hello and welcome to the Midlife Pilot Podcast, where we share the experiences and challenges of flying in midlife. Whether you're a seasoned pilot, training for a rating, or just thinking about getting started in aviation, we like to think of the podcast as your aviation companion and your weekly dose of aviation inspiration. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the descending from Mount Stupid with a super special guest. I'm Ben. I am an IFR-rated pilot with a commercial certificate based in the metro Atlanta area. I fly a Cessna 182, we like to call the Beast, who is getting her annual physical done. Joining me tonight, my friends, Brian, a private pilot in Nashville, home of the Bachelorette Super Charlie. He flies a Cherokee 180 named Lucy. Not Lacey, Lucy. Right? Did I get that one right?
Yeah, this is the first time you've botched that, but nice work.
Yeah. Well, when we get super special guests on it, I get a little. Also joining us tonight from the left coast, the great state of Oregon, based in Portlandia, flying a flight design CTLS we like to call the Egg. It's our friend Ted. Good evening, sir.
Hey there. Yeah, it's the wet West Coast this week.
Wet, but I mean, that's like. It's always wet in the Northwest.
By the way, so Ben, your plane's in annual. My plane's about to go in annual this weekend, and then Ted, yours is going the next
2 weeks. Yeah,
we're on the same cycle.
Pretty much.
We're all trying to get it done before Tango 82, before Texas.
That's right.
I'm glad you didn't take that in the direction I thought you were going to take that in, Brian. Joining us tonight as well, a super special guest, Paul Craig. He's a career CFI, started in 1974. He's taught hundreds and hundreds of students. He's also based in the Bachelor at Super Charlie at Middle Tennessee State University. He has a master's in aerospace education and a doctorate of education. He's not to be confused with the Scottish MMA champ, Paul Craig, or maybe he is. Maybe we don't know. He is the author of many books, one that you've heard us talk about on this podcast countless times, um, The Killing Zone. And it is great to have you with us, Paul. You're very revered here amongst the group here, and we appreciate you joining us.
Well, it's just such a pleasure to be with you guys. I just have been admirers of your podcast and your work and your efforts. It's just super to be with you tonight.
Thank you. Gentlemen, there hasn't been a lot of flying going on because, well, I'm in annual and we're praying nightly, doing the good compression dance, whatever that looks like, every night before we go to bed. But I've got a lot of traveling to do. Unfortunately, it's gonna have to be by car, so I'm still getting no sympathy from the spouse on that.
Yeah.
Well, also the weather here has just been a little crazy.
It has been a little crazy. What about you guys? Ted, I know you posted a video, I think, earlier today.
Yeah, I posted just a short one of one of those times when you're trying to call up on a busy channel and, getting ignored. And it's just kind of a fun one just underneath a bunch of big planes.
I think our friends at Opposing Bases probably needs to review that one because that is perfection in patience right there.
Oh, man.
How you handled that. I thought you did very well with that.
The only improvement to the video that you could make, Ted, would be if you do you remember the piano theme for the 70s show for the Incredible Hulk with Bill Bixby? Remember that?
Yeah.
Do you remember the really sad piano music as he's going out through the graveyard to look at his own tombstone? That's what I really wanted that music to be underneath you trying to get ATC's attention.
Yeah. Well, it's one of those things that took so much time to be able to hear the other frequency that the controller's listening on, so that you're trying to time when you speak up. And then, of course, when I did, all I said was my tail number. I'm not going to give altitude or anything. I just need him to know that I'm there right underneath all his people. So yeah, but no flying. It's been really wet. Had some little hail here. So mostly water.
Brian, any fun times in the air lately?
No, I mean, I guess I flew about a week ago. But nothing crazy. I did go down to Chattanooga to do some family related things, and I gotta say, Chattanooga's airport is so nice. I mean, it's such a beautiful approach, and I really like how when you're coming from the west or sort of the northwest, how I was, you kind of hang yourself up over the kind of shelf of the terrain there for a while, and then you kind of can drop it in. And I was just thinking about, it was one of those moments too where it was like, we all have those times, right, where you remember maybe the first time that you did a flight like this, when you had just gotten out of the nest with your private pilot certificate. And when you do it again and you do it again, and you just realize how kind of effortlessly comfortable it is, and you're not even worried about it. You're just, this is no big deal. And I just remember the first time I went there thinking about, okay, there's the terrain, and then, this is West Charlie Airport, and what am I doing? And then now it's just like, oh, this place is, especially after being around B&A,
right?
Chattanooga is like a sleepy, non-towered airport compared to being around.
So, I don't know if I've told y'all this story. I don't think I have. Chattanooga holds a super special place in my heart. I did my private and my instrument check rides out of that airport.
Really?
When I
How
did
did
my
I not
private,
know that?
So when I did my private, I got discontinued for my first time. It was during the PTS days, and I didn't do the power off 180 correctly. And I went back and retested it in Chattanooga. And my DPE, who I still love dearly, said, we're going to spend more time doing paperwork than it was to get your than we did in the air. I did it, did the power off, nailed it, crushed it, did the paperwork. And for some reason, I'm all hyped up with nerves and everything. And I go to check the oil again. The plane, had been running for a little bit, and I didn't put the oil cap on right.
Oh.
And when I took off, there was a big splat of oil right on my windshield. And the controllers there were all, and couldn't be any more freshly minted private pilot at that point in time. I had 0.0 hours after getting my ticket. But they were really cool. We got it back down on the ground. I had enough of a view to get it down on the ground. And but I just remember, like, it was a great experience working with those guys.
So this is your thing, is you're entree into anything big or new, you find a way to make it go sideways right away.
Would that make me a drama king, I guess? I don't know.
Good
Of
experience.
course,
Anyway.
we're always referencing how you first came into this podcast in that episode where your computer voice sounded like Max Headroom. So
I always make a big grand entrance in
Yes.
anything I do.
it was the big reveal.
That's exactly right. But anyway, I do love Chattanooga, and I go there a lot. But I think for now we want to get to our guest. But let's go ahead and knock out the.
Yeah, we're gonna blast through this because we want as much time with you, Paul, as possible. So thanks for hanging with us while we do all these podcasty things. All right, housekeeping. We're grateful for you all making this the best pilot community that we know of, a positive space where we share everything from training experiences, share personal minimums, tackle ownership challenges, review flight plans, and best of all, make new aviation friends like Paul. Join our Patreon community from $1 a month, or you can do a one-time annual for 25 cents per episode. Access exclusive content, including check ride debriefs, which we got a bunch of those coming. Oh my gosh, we haven't even covered this yet. Paul, we do these things called Killing Zone Conversations.
I do. I'm aware of that.
Now, are we under lawsuit, or are we okay with that?
We're going to let you out.
Yes, we spelled it in sort of like a Limp Biscuit kind of way. It's like just to try to distance ourselves from any kind of credibility that you would provide naturally. So yeah, Killing Zone Conversations and more on Discord. 10% supports Freedom Aviation Network's anti-human trafficking efforts. Watch us live on YouTube Mondays 8 p.m. Eastern. Share your stories at Midlife Pilot. Midlife Pilot Podcast at gmail.com. We read all the messages. You might hear yours on the show. For everything Midlife Pilot Podcast, community feedback, merch, and more, midlifepilotpodcast.com. Boom.
Thank you.
Excellent.
We got quite a few new Patreon members over the last week. Ted, do you want to give them the shout out?
Yeah. I really want to thank the people who have joined us. At the Landomatic level, we have Lance D. At the Hershey Bar level, we have Daniel C., Chuck K., Roberto S., and our friend Elliot Cox. It's nice to see Elliot. He's even in the chat tonight. And this week in Discord, we have a new training channel for instructors that seems to be fairly popular. Lots of talk about FOI and some people like Seth Lake and Nathan Ballard that are happy to help out. So it's been fun seeing that take off. We have 2 new sport pilots this week that just got their tickets. That's Lance and Roberto. So
All right.
it's nice to see,
Yeah.
there's dozens of us. And at the private level, we Jess got his ticket, and BitShifter, I think I congratulated last week, but got their ticket. And
Well done.
Last accomplishment there, first takeoff and landing, is Alex S. So
Yeah.
that's a
It's a
great
huge
time.
week for us this past week.
Yeah. And we've got a zillion debriefs. Mark is doing a great job on those. Those will be coming out on Patreon soon. So some private debriefs, instrument debriefs, starting a new club with a plane.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, those are always fun, kind of on the side conversations.
Yeah. Hopefully inspiring others to do the same.
Yeah.
So
Congratulations, everybody.
Yeah.
thanks. So tonight we have Paul with us, again, author of Killing Zone. And first of all, Paul, why don't we start this with just telling us a little bit about yourself? My guess is that a lot of the folks in the chat probably know who you are or know your work, but if you give us a little bit of background, maybe.
Sure. Thanks. And thanks again for having me. This is just a thrill. there was nobody in my family that was a pilot. I had nobody to, look up to see. But when I was in high school here in Nashville, I guess I needed a science credit so I could graduate from high school. And maybe chemistry and physics seemed a little steep. So there was an English teacher at my high school who was also a private pilot. And he put on an aviation class, one period a day. And I took that class having no clue what it was about. And that's really how I got my start. So I wasn't a midlife pilot. I was a high school pilot. And it was one of those things that I didn't really know what I was going to do. I didn't know, I was pretty undermotivated as a student in high school and didn't really have a plan. But when I was able to find out about aviation and fly an airplane for the first time, I had my plan, right? It's just, and I knew where I was going, and I was able to channel some of my, some of my wandering around into a focus, and it was aviation, it was airplanes that made that happen.
Yeah,
it's amazing. And that was in a time called the 70s.
Yeah, and my first flight was in 1974.
Yeah.
At an airport here in Nashville, Cornelia Ford Air Park, that doesn't even exist anymore.
And wasn't that the airport that Patsy Cline was trying to make it to?
I think that's correct. I grew up in Nashville thinking Cornelia Fort was like a fort, like, maybe a Civil War fort or something.
Right.
But, Cornelia Fort was a pilot. She was a famous aviator, and she flew in World War II for the group that women couldn't fly in combat, so they would fly airplanes from the factory to the front. That's why she was in Hawaii on the morning of the Pearl Harbor attack, giving a flight instruction lesson. She was the first one to see the Japanese come over the ridge.
Wow.
Unbelievable. I think they have a lot of ephemera and storytelling around her at the Beechcraft Museum, if I'm not mistaken.
Absolutely. They certainly do.
But yeah, so now, while we're definitely interested in your background and your qualifications, to all of the things, I am treating this like I am a listener, and I want to get to some things. You can weave in some backstory and qualifications whenever you feel like you might need to, or we can just accept that you've already written a bunch of books. So, I mean, you're probably qualified. And if you really want to know more about Paul, you can Google him. But I want to get right to the heart of this, which is this book, The Killing Zone. Now, I imagine this is kind of like your Led Zeppelin 4 of books. It's like, here we go with Stairway to Heaven again. I've got a bunch of other books, man. Haven't you heard my other, my freeform jazz record?
We're going to get to those too, by the way.
Yeah, we will get to those. But I think that this is sort of the touchstone, and I just wonder from the start, even before I had, or maybe right around the time I had taken my first lesson, or just before. I started training in April of 2021 over here at John Toon. I was seeing everywhere in my internet exploration of becoming a pilot that this is an essential reading. And so, of course, I bought it, and then my wife was horrified to see it just kind of laying around, by title at least. And but once I explained what was really going on here, I think it became an item of fascination. And the thing that I really appreciated about this book, and I'll just tell you that, and I'm wondering if this is maybe how you intended it to be or just the way it worked out, but I have read this book in part or in whole so many times, and it has this I don't know, it is a bit of a reference, but it's sort of like I can go back through. I have the brain that I used when I was reading this as a brand new trainee or student pilot. And then I have the way that I was looking at it perhaps right after I got my private pilot certificate, and what that looked like, and how these things kind of felt to read, and how they became more important in certain ways, and certain things resonated more. And then even through all of my climb up Mount Stupid, I I've been referencing this, and I keep it here on my desk all the time. It's like the thing that I will just pull open. Now I'm coming up on 650 hours. And so I still glean so much from it. Tell us about how this began and how you decided on this mode of presentation, because I find it perfect. And was it maybe intentional that this is something that can be more living and breathing for people?
Well, thanks for all those comments. Yeah, all the English teachers that I ever had in high school and college are flabbergasted that I ever put words into a sentence with actual punctuation. When I was a young flight instructor, I wrote some articles and sent them into some of the magazines at the time. Some of these magazines aren't even around anymore. Air Progress was one of them, as I remember. Plane, maybe Private Pilot, maybe Plane and Pilot, and so some of them got published. Okay, so I'm thinking, oh, that's cool. So I had this idea that I would take all these articles and kind of stack them back to back and turn that into a manuscript. Okay, now that's not a really great idea, but I didn't know any better, and so I went to my bookshelf and I wrote down all the publishers of all the aviation books that I had on my bookshelf. And so I sent my manuscript to all of them and received rejection letters from most all of them. And then one day this guy called me and he said that he was from McGraw Hill in New York, and he, received what I'd sent him. And he starts going on and on. Well, it's very conversational. It's kind of not like what we have now. It's not a textbook. It's, these kind of things. And he's being very complimentary. And at one point he says, but we're not going to publish it. I'm going, why don't you just send me a rejection letter like everybody else? He said, well, we're a very conservative company. We don't publish anything off the street. We have these marketing experts that figure out what niches in the market and gaps there might be. And then if we find somebody that we think could write something, we ask them to do a project. So would you like to do a project? Now, at this point, I'm saying, this has got to be one of my buddies, right, who's playing a joke on me. Like, who is this guy really? And so anyway, that's what led to that first book, Be a Better Pilot. And that was, oh my gosh,
I know.
you had to dust that off. I think that was published in what? Oh, look at that picture. Yeah, I had hair and it was all the same color. And that was like 92, I think, when that was published. And so from there, I did another one, and I did another one. At some point, I'm thinking maybe I'm getting a little bit in my head about this and saying, well, who are these marketing gurus that are supposed to be telling us what? I'm out here flight instruction every day. So maybe I should know what we need. So from about book 2, 3 on, I came up with some ideas, and The Killing Zone was like number 7 of my Led Zeppelin albums. And you're right. We need to discuss the title. My original title was the Danger Zone. You might remember there's a song, The Danger Zone, that was in a movie. So the publisher wasn't keen on that. And so you're right. It's not really a coffee table book title. I've had FBO guys say it's kind of hard for me to put this in the counter.
Get people to sign up.
Exactly. So I don't know if that's certainly can have a negative, but it's designed to grab you by the shoulder and shake you and say, this really could happen to you. And if that's a stark title that is abrupt, then maybe that's sort of the point. It's really designed for people who are low time, mostly new private pilots, new sport pilots, and who are just getting started. And, I didn't know what the Killing Zone was. I started to do some research on, these accidents that happen. How many flight hours does the pilot have on the day of the accident? And that led me to find that there's sort of a zone. It starts at about 50 hours or post-student pilot days through about 350 hours. And that's where the accidents were spiking, in that zone.
Yeah.
And so in the first edition of the book, I started in 1983 because although I started flying in 74, I became a flight instructor in 83. So I figured anything that's happened since then has been on my watch, right? So I wrote it and took all the accident numbers from 1983 to 1999. And then the second edition, the one that Brian just held up a second ago, that ran us from about 2000 until about 2011. And so I figured that, I didn't know if there'd ever be a third edition. I didn't know. But so many things have happened in the last decade. I think we know and understand we've got new topics and new challenges for us every day. And so McGraw-Hill, who I did 10 books with them and had wonderful relationships with them. The editors I worked with were fantastic, but over time they either moved on or retired. And McGraw-Hill really has gotten away from aviation books. That's just not their thing anymore. And so although they had the rights to all the future editions that there might be, they really weren't, they really weren't interested. And so I just asked them to release me from the contract. And they didn't have to, but about a year they did. And so that's why many folks in the last year or so have been unable to find the book, because once McGraw-Hill cut me loose, and when I became a free agent, so to speak, then they took them off their avenues for sales. But I was only a free agent about a week, because I agreed to write the third edition, which will come out this coming summer with Aviation Supplies and Academics, ASA. And I know those people. I've written for them before. And I like to work with people that I know and trust. And it's a handshake deal. That's just the way I am. And so we're excited to have another edition coming out this summer. And most of the time when you write a new edition to a book, the publisher wants you to have maybe 10, 15% different. Well, this is like 90% different than the second edition, because it's all stuff that's happened since the second edition. So it was exciting to write, and I think it's going to be in the same vein. I mean, I just sit down at the computer and I just have a conversation with the keyboard. It's just you and me talking on a Saturday afternoon at the hangar. That's the style I hope comes across. There's nothing wrong with textbooks, but I don't write them. Right. I'm a flight instructor, and we just talk about the things that we love to talk about, and try to get better at stuff and improve things.
Yeah, well, that's how we kind of crossed paths. Was somebody in our Discord had said, this book isn't available anywhere. It's on Amazon. There's a few used copies going for $600 because the bots just.
I don't get $600.
Yeah, nobody's making that. So yeah, and I thought, I'm just going to go on a flyer and see if I can find an email for Paul. And I reached out and got that story. And so yeah, they gave you the rights to the book, which means they don't want to have any inventory. They don't even have it anymore.
Guys, I'm going to be back. I'm going to eBay right now for just a minute.
Just hold on a couple months and get the new one.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why there's this period of time that's just not available for people, which is kind of, I don't know, it's kind of fascinating because it was changing hands is why it went away. Mm-hmm. And yeah. So you said a lot has changed since 2011, and I think I actually have some more questions about that, but certainly the rise of ADS-B, bringing glass into the cockpits, whether that's an EFB or on the displays built into the plane, how has that affected aviation in the last 15 years? Yeah,
there's just been, change happens faster than certainly aviation regulations can keep up, for sure. And you just think about it, electronic flight bags, even use of cell phones and, pilot distractions in the cockpit is a whole topic now that we would not have even thought about 15 or 20 years ago. It used to be that experimental and amateur built, home built aircraft was kind of like a fringe of aviation. Not anymore. Last year there was more single engine home built aircraft built in the United States, more than from factories, from actual manufacturers. So this is not a fringe. This is aviation. And so that's a whole new area that has grown up, in front of our eyes. You mentioned ADS-B. The airplanes have internal data collection now. We have to deal with laser strikes. We have to deal with the rise and conflicts with drones. In the second edition, The Killing Zone, I think I spent maybe a page talking about pilot stress. That was really weak, because now pilot mental health is a huge deal. And we never really paid the proper attention to it, but now we do. So all these things had to be addressed. I mean, two things to think about. If there'd not been any accidents, wouldn't it have been cool if there was no need to write a third edition?
Yeah.
But there were accidents, and there's so many new challenges that are not in the previous editions. I mean, 1980, that's 40 years ago when this data started. So a lot of things have changed in that length of time. So yeah, it's been a changing environment for us all, and therefore we have to adapt, of course.
That's crazy. We did get a listener feedback, and we kind of held on to it because it fits right in with this. As you know, Paul, we're all, this whole podcast about learning how to fly later in life. And after reading the second edition, it felt like a lot of those accident cases were people in our situation. Jonathan M. writes, when I got my license years ago, I was pretty brave and fearless, but now in my 50s, I'm a lot more careful. I've been working to learn from aviation accidents so I can be safer. Here's my question. How do pilots with thousands of hours of experience still manage to stall, spin, and crash? I start hearing that imposter voice talking and wonder if it could happen to them. If it can happen to them, I'm really at a disadvantage, or am I missing something?
Well, let's talk about that. No, number one, we should all understand nobody is immune to an accident. During the third edition research, which was from 2012 to 2023, there was an accident. The highest time pilot that had an accident during those years had 44,020 hours. I thought that was a mistake. I thought they rounded off to 44,000, but 44,020, that's kind of specific, right? And so there's no immunity. We just have to be careful. And I guess there's good and bad in that time period of the third edition. But like I just said, 2012 to 2023, I wrote some numbers so I'd get it right. There was 12,406 general aviation airplane accidents. That's what I studied. I didn't do balloons. I didn't do helicopters, just airplanes. So anybody's welcome to jump in and do those other ones. Okay. But of those 12,406 accidents, I say only, I don't mean to make light of it, but only 17.5% were fatal, which means 82.5% or 8,915 accidents were survived. And the vast majority of those, there was no injuries or minor injuries to the pilot or passengers. Okay. So that means of that 8,915 pilot survivors, you got to think some of those people are listening here tonight, right? And so think about it. The question was excellent in that. I think that people who have been in an accident, that some people might argue that that's evidence that they're not a safe pilot. I would argue opposite. I think these are people who know that they can be in an accident. These are people who understand that it is foolhardy to believe that this can't happen to me. People will think, well, yeah, accidents do happen, but I'm very meticulous in my planning when I fly. I stay up to my currency. I go to safety seminars. I listen to podcasts. Okay, it must be those other guys who are like sloppy and not well prepared. Those are the accident pilots. But let's get one thing clear: that's not true. Anybody, and of those 8,915 pilots, we were to talk to them, I can promise you that none of them believed they were going to be in an accident on the day they drove to the airport on the day of their accident.
Mm-hmm.
You're right. So So I would say those folks who now no longer believe that that cannot happen to them would be our best teachers. And you could probably argue that someone who's never been in an accident, that may be because they do all the things and they are safe and they do all the things to remain safe. But it could also be that they've done a few risky things and got away with it.
Right.
You know, I mean, Murphy's law says anything that go wrong will. I disagree. I think Murphy is wrong because some things that can go wrong sometimes will go right. And we get away with it, maybe dumb luck or just by accident. It's not an accident, but we get in our head that, that's okay because I didn't, I got away with it. So you could argue, I'm not advocating for accidents by any means, don't get me wrong. But I think someone who, has had that experience and can tell us about it is a much safer pilot now. So,
Right.
so that's my view on it. And, I never, ever I hope I never come across as, pointing fingers or laying blame or say, oh, this guy screwed up or he shouldn't have done that. That's not my job. I mean, my job is education. It's talking about how we can learn from this and move forward with just wiser and making better choices and those things. And most of those accidents took place when there was decision making in their plans that was non-aviation related. If you look at the weather and you're going to go to Chattanooga and the weather's low ceiling and visibility, it's raining, and I was just going to go up there to eat a hamburger or something, go to the choo-choo or something. On a day like that, I'm not going, right? It's an easy decision. But what if other factors start to come into play that influences your aviation decision? In the years of 2012 to 2023, what do you think, which day of the year had the most accidents? What do you think?
I'm going to guess January 1st.
I'm going to guess July 4th, somewhere right in the middle of the safe summer.
Those are popular accident dates, but the date that had the most accidents in that period of time was the Wednesday before Thanksgiving.
Oh.
Yeah.
Now think about that. People wanted to get home for Thanksgiving. The weather might be marginal, and on a normal day, they would never even think about it. But the families depended on them to be there. And I had to work all day and had to leave late in the afternoon before Thanksgiving's the next day. So that to me tells you everything you need to know. Pilots who are wise, cautious, extremely careful can still make bad decisions when they get under pressure like that. Mm-hmm. And we see it all the time.
So in the time period between the second edition and the third edition, not only do you have a new data set, but if you just take a cross section of the culture and technology and how that relates to behavior and a lot of the things that we've seen come about in the last, say, 10 to 15 years, we've got a completely different world. We've got a world where people need to be pacified for every possible millisecond of their potential boredom because they can't even stand in a line anymore without being engrossed in their phones.
Yeah.
We've got everybody driving and texting. We've got kids that are fully addicted to the internet and are more into that reality or non-reality than actual reality. And we have, coincidentally, the rise of avionics and MFDs and ForeFlight and all of the things. For you and your perspective, as you're taking on these new things, do you feel that there's now maybe a particular rise of a new hazardous attitude or maybe an accelerated sort of form of invulnerability because people are, for whatever reason, there's just now this obfuscation between behavior and consequences in the same way that cars have become so, quote unquote, safe with airbags and all these cameras and all these things, but it's actually, deteriorating people's ability to maybe drive in some ways or whatever. Yeah. So do you see any parallels in behavior that accelerates maybe hazardous attitudes that you are going to be walking through?
Well, I think maybe these days we might actually have more available safety, but do we use practical applications with that safety? And there's a chapter in the new book about pilot distractions, which talks about just what you said about, there have been accidents in the recent past where people were distracted by their phone, or they're taking a selfie, or they're texting or something, and accidents was the result, and totally unavoidable. And you have to, whenever you get on an airplane, man, you got to be there, right? You got to be present. It's one of the cool things about aviation, right? When you get on an airplane and you detach yourself from the ground, it's not only a physical detachment from the ground, it needs to be a mental detachment from the ground. You got to leave those bills that are past due, and any issues you have on the ground, you got to leave them on the ground.
I do it every time.
Yes, because if they get involved with your decision making or distractions like that, especially if you're going to physically distract yourself with multimedia and things like that, then it just adds to the issues that take us away from our thought process. I mean, when you're in an airplane, enjoy it. You're there. Be in the moment. Do that. Get on the ground and do all the stuff later.
What do I call it, Brian?
Air therapy.
That's right.
And
Yes.
Ben and I both have the same thing of loving flying a high wing, because we spend most of our time just with our noses to the window, just looking outside, because that's the amazing thing about aviation, is that you are sitting there flying over this territory you don't see otherwise. But
cool.
So you've had you said you had 100, almost 200 CFI students that you've taught, and I mean the numbers are all huge. Compare young pilots to midlife pilots, especially those that learn in midlife. From your experience, what you've seen.
Well, older pilots. Now, I'm a university professor, so I work with college students younger than midlife, and so my experience with older pilots is that they are even more dedicated. They're, think about it. I've had pilots who are, in their 40s, and if they'd had the chance to fly when they were younger, they might have. But life and responsibilities and things like that kind of in the way, and it was their dream, but they couldn't realize it. So when they do get the opportunity, man, they are all in. They are dedicated. I don't. When I'm talking to college students, I need, you probably ought to look over this stuff. When I talk to older pilots, they've already looked over this stuff. They've already, done all their research. And so they're a joy to work with, simply because they are all in, because they've got a lot at stake, right? They've made sacrifices to get to be a midlife pilot. Takes a lot of decision. I'm not talking money but time and commitment and sectionalizing all the other ways we get torn apart. We got so many hooks in us, in regular life, and we're going to put flying in there too. Man, to do that requires a lot of commitment. And so, you'd love to work with people who are as committed as you are and love what you're doing together. It's just a lot of fun. So it's one of the reasons I'm attracted to this, work that you guys are doing. It's just so meaningful, because I mean, if people are listening, they're telling me, I know they're thinking, yeah, I have always wanted to do this and never had a chance to until now. So I'm not going to blow it. This is my chance, and I've waited maybe decades.
Yes.
And so let's rock.
Yeah.
Very good. I want to get to this question. So this is a friend of ours. It's Elliot in the chat has a question for Paul. Elliot's instructor, who also was my DPE for my commercial. It's our friend RLH. I don't know if but he says, my instructor in the chat tonight told me at least a dozen times that hope is not a strategy. How do you instill that into young pilots?
Sometimes I've heard people going up for their check ride, and somebody will say, well, good luck on your check ride. And I want to say, we shouldn't be relying on luck. If good luck on your check ride, if you need luck to do this right, then we're not ready yet. And so it's a challenge. And when you say younger pilots, older pilots, remember, everybody is different. It's not like you can say all young pilots will be like this. So you got to take everybody as an individual, but it is an awesome responsibility. I mean, when I get on an airliner, instead of going in the door and turning right, I usually turn left and pop into the flight deck to see, if any of my former students are flying. And it's freaky how many times, one, two, and a couple times both
Wow.
were my students. And so, I tell them how proud I am of them and those kind of things.
Depending on the student, right? It could be like, hey, no, I'm getting off this plane.
No. They got to get back to work. So I walked through the first class cabin because they failed to upgrade me, right? My former students. And I'm thinking to myself, it wasn't that long ago that I remember that I wouldn't trust this kid with my old car. And now he's taking me and 100 other people to New York City in $100 million jet. So when you think about the responsibility we're talking about, and most people won't maybe fly $100 million jet, but you see what I'm saying? Even one person has the responsibility of others.
Yeah.
And so it's the ability to try to understand that you got to be the real deal. You can't rely on strategies or hope or luck. You got to know your basics, and you got to know, the responsibility, the awesome responsibility of pilot in command.
Yeah.
Speaking of responsibility, Paul, when you write a book like this, what an incredible responsibility that is. And I know you talk about this as if it's, hey, this is very casual and it's very conversational, but there is a lot of careful consideration, obviously, in all of it. Anything to do with anything instructive or safety with respect to aviation, it is, I'm sure, quite the responsibility. And one of the things I wanted to sort of pile on that is to say, I'll give you one quick example of how what you did saved me from a particular possible incident. I was in training and I had been reading this book, and I read one of the tales that you mentioned was that there were two pilots flying a plane somewhere, and they did a fuel stop, and they did whatever they did to get fuel. Somebody was doing something. Somebody was doing something else. Long story short, one of the fuel caps is not on the plane as they depart. And I just thought, that is something I don't want to happen. And how, especially when you're, and this is what I'm talking about too, about the perspective, when you're a training pilot, student pilot, it's almost unbelievable. Like, how could two pilots ever overlook such a simple, obvious thing? And then when you are looking at it from a more experienced pilot point of view, you're like, I can totally see how this would happen. But for me, I had an experience where we had just topped off. It was in a 172, and the fuel truck had come over to top us off or something. And the plane was parked in a not typical place because they were doing construction over at John Tune at the time, and stuff was just kind of all over the place. And we were kind of distracted, me and my instructor. But we it was one of those things where you get in the plane and you do all the buckling in and getting things out, and there's all that sound and ruckus going on in the plane. And finally, you get everything sort of settled in to start now going through the checklist. And I realized, I looked over at my instructor and I said, "Did you check the fuel caps? Because did you?" And in that moment, it would have been terribly easy for me probably to even convince my instructor at that point, who's probably very desensitized to this for whatever good or for bad reasons. But I'm just saying, I was all comfortable with all of my things. And I just said, nope, stop, undo the belt, take all my knee board off, whatever. I'm getting, because this is the problem with the high wings, guys, right? I couldn't just look out, save myself a whole thing. I had to get out and climb up there and look. And sure enough, one of the fuel caps was not on. And it's the only time that I had failed to check them, gotten in the plane, and then realized that I had failed to check them, stopped what I was doing, got back out. And all I had was that story in mind. And if I hadn't have read that story, I wouldn't have had that sensitivity, I don't think, to that one item that we had missed. And perhaps my instructor wouldn't have either. I don't know. So what say you, Paul?
Well, all those stories that we can tell like that, they're not, far-fetched outliers. We can put ourselves in every one of these stories, because anybody could make that simple mistake. We had a situation where our fuel guys got in the habit of topping off and deliberately leaving the caps off because they felt like the pilot wanted to themselves secure the cap, which is a good thing, but it wasn't so good when a flight got canceled. Nobody knew the caps were still off, and the next day, after it rained all night, pilots showed up with water in the tanks. So that was a bad policy. So yeah, every one of those stories is not some unique thing. This crazy thing happened. No, these are all normal things, really. That could and that doesn't make anything. That doesn't mean you're a bad pilot. Not sloppy pilot, lazy. No, it's just we have to put ourselves in these positions because we are all in these positions.
Yeah, I when I was a pre-solo student and I read Killing Zone for the first time, I wrote down about 6 notes to myself, and the one they still all apply, but number 1 was it's always fuel, and that's not because every accident is caused by fuel, but that is like the number 1 thing that you can do to change the outcome.
Right.
That it's hard for that not to be a human failing when it's a fuel issue. And if I ever have a problem, I have myself to blame. And I've certainly thought about that. And there's a reason that I have my patterns on checking fuel, and what I do with that is because of that number 1 issue. Ben, you've got something though.
Yeah, I want to switch gears just a little bit. Paul published a book called Flight Times: Tales and Stories from the Second Best Instructor. And when was that? When did you write that?
I wrote it over the course of a period of years because it's a collection of stories.
Right.
To be frank with you, it's sort of the antidote to the Killing Zone. These are all happy ending stories. And I'm not the second best flight instructor. That subtitle is a reference to my association with Bill Kirshner. I know you guys had recently flown down to Swanee,
yes,
University of the South Airport. That was Bill's home base, and Bill wrote many of the aviation books, the Student Pilot Manual, and other things like that in the 60s and 70s. And a lot of pilots like myself, my age, we kind of grew up with Bill's books. And I was so fortunate to get to know him and work with him, took his aerobatics class, took his spin courses. And he would send me some drafts of some of his new books. And I would, read them through and, just put in some, bits and pieces. And so he sent me a copy when it got published, and he autographed it, and it said to the world's second best flight instructor, because obviously he was the best. And so let me just go on record now. I've known many flight instructors better than me. One of my students is himself in the Flight Instructor Hall of Fame, Fred Nauer. And so yeah, but Flight Times is it's available on Amazon. Is just a collection of stories about how cool aviation is, and lessons learned, and people that I've met, and brushes with history that I've been fortunate to have.
And let me tell you, there's some significant brushes with history. So I'm about halfway through this book, and I want our audience, both our live audience and our listeners out there, there's a story in there that literally, I'm laying in bed reading this on my Kindle, and I start laughing so hard that it wakes my wife up.
Sorry about that.
No, don't, please don't. So if you don't mind, I just want to give a quick overview of the story. You're up with Bill in Swanee.
Yeah.
And you're in a 150 or 152, I can't remember, and you're doing spin training.
Yeah.
Or you're just doing spins. I don't know you're training, but you're just doing spins.
Mm-hmm.
And you point out in the book that there's a specific number of turns where the centrifugal force of the gas will be out and starve the engine of fuel. I think it was 20 or 23. I can't remember.
We went 23 turns a couple of times, but I think the engine stops at about turn 11.
Okay.
That's just how long it takes the fuel to go.
So you're in the plane with Bill, and I think you're the pilot in command, but he had maybe advanced to an age where he wasn't able to do it, but he was just going up with you to have some fun.
Right.
And you're in like the 20th spin, and all at the same time, he opens the window of this 150, and he tells you to stop the spin, and right as you're starting the engine back up, he says, "Clear prop."
He did.
While he's in there.
He yelled "clear prop." We went at the bottom of 23 turns, and I recovered, and he started the engine and yelled "clear prop." And we were wearing parachutes. And I said, "Bill, I'm not going to jump out of this airplane." And he said, "Well, if I jump out, I'll yell back to you that I'm going to go for help and see you later." He was a great guy, hilarious guy, and a wonderful mentor. All right down there at Bill Kirshner's.
Our friend Ron Horton, who was my DP for my commercial and an amazing instructor in his own right, he states in our chat, and we appreciate you joining us, Ron. I learned from Bill Kirshner's Student Pilot Flight Manual, Edition 2. The current version, many decades later, is version 11. Good flight instruction is timeless, which I believe that to be absolutely the case.
Absolutely. Yeah, that second book I wrote is on stalls and spins, and I was not an expert on stalls and spins, so I went to Bill, and I asked him permission to write the book because this is his thing. He's the spin doctor, and he said, "Oh heck, Paul, you go ahead and write the book. You know, the more information we can get out there, the better." And so he really taught me a lot about the writing business and certainly about aviation. But he was one of a kind.
Your brushes, the people that you bring, and the cool thing about this memoir that I really like is that you're telling these stories, and then you'll put in entry from your flight from your logbook with this flight associated with that story. And I just really like how you've woven that together. It's been a really enjoyable book. So
I appreciate it. Yeah, it was fun to write. It's like I said, it's sort of an antidote to the killing zone. Because it's interesting stories. One of the stories that's in there, and it has to do with a midlife pilot. I had a student pilot. He was, I think, 42, 43 years old. One of these guys that had wanted to fly his life and just never had the chance. And he was like a great student. And so I was flying with him, and the day came that I thought he was ready to fly solo. This was at a Class D airport, operating control tower. And so we'd done all the legal stuff, to get him ready. And I signed him off, and I told him to shut down and then go through the whole thing. And I told him to do 3 touch and goes. So I got out of the plane and headed in, and he went through the checklist. So I kind of snuck over to the control tower because, I knew the controllers over there. And I pushed the call box at the base of the tower. And so they let me in. And I took the elevator to the top. Doesn't go all the way to the top. You got to take a spiral staircase. I get up there, and the controller at the tower position was Sonny Lasky. He was also one of my instrument students. If you ever have the opportunity to teach IFR to a controller, it's fantastic. He pays me every week so he can teach me about ATC. And so anyway, so I said, "Hey, I got a guy on his first ever solo." And he said, "Well, who is it?" And I said, "It's Alan." He said, "Oh, I know Alan." And so about the time I get there, he's given Alan the clearance for takeoff on his very first solo flight. He takes off. There was another guy, the third guy in the tower was running the ground control. So Alan takes off, makes his left base, elects crosswind, enters the downwind, calls in, Kinston Tower, and says 14 kilo, downwind for runway 5, request touch and go. He gets permission for touch and go. Comes around. And I grabbed these binoculars that were sitting on the desk because I wanted to see his first solo landing. First solo landings are usually pretty good. Second one's a little iffy. So I'm watching through the glasses, and he's making a really good landing. Man, that was fantastic. So he touch and goes. He's back in the air. He turns crosswind. He turns downwind. Same thing. Request touch and go. So he's like flying right to left in front of us, and we're watching him, right? And so about this time on the radio, we hear Kinston Tower, SAM 29,000 inbound for landing. Now, SAM 29,000, SAM stands for Special Air Mission, and SAM 29,000 is the call sign for Air Force One when the president's not on board. Okay, so I'm going, we all look to the right. He's coming from the north, and we see him, and it's like, Alan is now turning almost but not quite to base. And so Sonny tells Air Force One, 29,000. He says, "Okay, interim report left downwind for runway 5." And I like slapped him on the shoulder. "What are you putting a 747 behind my student on first solo for?" "Well, he's Air Force One. What am I supposed to do?" So he's here already, right? He's entering a downwind. It's like he's blotting out the sun. There's like this huge shade over the airport. And so he reports downwind, and Sonny says, 29,000, you're cleared for touch and go runway 5. Be advised, you're number 2 in the pattern behind the Cessna. So now Alan is on base. He's doing what? 60 knots. 747's doing 175 knots. You see my worry here. Okay.
Yeah.
The captain of 29,000 says, "We got the Cessna in sight. We'll be number 2." And Sonny says, "Be advised, the Cessna is a student pilot on his very first solo flight."
Yeah.
So now I'm a little nervous. So I tell Sonny, "Tell 14 kilo, tell Alan to make this a full stop." So he says 14 kilo, request you make full stop. And Alan came back and said, "No, my flight instructor told me to do 3 touch and goes." and Alan says, "Well, your flight instructor happens to be up here in the tower with us, and he's changed his mind. He wants you to make this a full stop landing." So he's on final. 747's on base. Okay. And it looks like this might have only been 20 seconds, but it seemed like an hour. He makes a pretty good landing, but he misses the first turnoff. Okay. Now the 747 is half mile or closer, and, he's not really urgently getting off. And that's when it hit me that, in his training, I never covered the get off the runway in an emergency because there's a 747 behind you maneuver. I never did that.
Yeah.
And so, it's getting closer. It's getting closer. So finally he turns off and he clears the line just as the 747's touching down. Alan told me later he heard the engines, 4 jet engines spin up, and the wake he's on the ground, but the wings started rocking so that one of the main gear came off the ground.
Wow.
Okay. And so now quickly, let's make a comparison here. What kind of credentials do you have to be the captain of Air Force One? So, tens of thousands of flight hours, I guess the Air Force equivalent of a 747 type rating, illustrious military flying career, and the ability for us to trust the president of the United States when you fly. And then there's Alan, a student pilot with 12 hours maybe. We can trust him with a Cessna 152 at this point, right? So these two pilots are as far away from each other as can possibly be. And as the 747 climbed out on his way back to Joint Base Andrews, he breaks radio protocol. And instead of addressing the tower, he addresses Alan. And he says, "Cessna pilot, good job and welcome to the club."
Oh,
The best.
caution, wake turbulence.
Yeah.
So that was a great
amazing.
story about a midlife pilot.
There's
Wow.
probably not a better solo story out there.
Well,
I'm
it was
just
a
not sure how
little
you could top
nerve-wracking
that
at the
one.
time, I will tell you that.
Yeah.
I took a photograph of Air Force One zipping past from the tower.
That's crazy. But that's the kind of stories that you're going to get in this book. So I know we've got the 3rd edition coming out, but in the meantime, go get this book. It's a really, really good read.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we have to wrap here soon, but I wanted to say or ask Paul, if you had, it's kind of, this is a little greedy. You've already done so much for us, but we're just going to ask for a little bit more. If you could give one piece of advice to a student midlife pilot or a new midlife pilot, or really any midlife pilot, if you had any midlife pilot advice, sage advice, no pun, no disrespect, Ben, but we're in the presence of greatness. So if you wanted to leave us with some midlife pilot wisdom, what do you think would be that for us?
Gosh, I don't know about wisdom, but I mean, I would say follow your passion. You didn't do this, half-heartedly. This was something you had thought about for a long time. You've been interested in maybe since a kid, right? And it's been there burning inside you this whole time, and how now you're letting it out. So you know, I don't need to tell you to give it all you got, because you wouldn't be doing this at this time under these circumstances with this opportunity if you weren't already doing it. So I would say soak up everything, be meticulous, be careful, but man, have fun and love what this cool aviation thing that we have.
Yeah.
Unreal. Love it. That's really what it's all about. It's just the passion and the love of it. And what else reason would there be to do something so completely impractical as the recreational gas burning that we do?
I'm going to hit one more comment before we wrap up. Again, from Mr. Horton. Great story. The tower should have given the 747 a caution wake turbulence for the 152 ahead of you.
that would have Sonny messed up on that one. You're right.
Watch out for the prop wash. Well, look, it's been a really fun night for me, and I know I'm speaking for my co-host Paul. So we really can't thank you enough for joining us. Would love to get you back on again soon. For all of you pilots out there listening, or all of you that want to be pilots, you need to
join us. Come on.
You need to, when this book comes out, get the 3rd edition of The Killing Zone. It will help you in ways that you can't even imagine. As always, you can engage with us via our website, midlifepilotpodcast.com. You can email us at midlifepilotpodcast@gmail.com. Brian, Ted, any other comments before we wrap up?
No, just thank you, Paul. This has been fantastic.
Yeah.
So
My
I do
pleasure.
have one bit of wisdom I'd like to impart before we leave. An optimist laughs to forget. A pessimist forgets to laugh.
Love it.
Yep. Signing off.